generations, and let's say 10 generations. So we worked on the land around Cambridge, and then at some point we became potato merchants. And one of my great-great-great-great-grandfathers took a load of potatoes, brought them to Covent Garden and started selling potatoes. And for 4 generations, we were potato merchants. And then for 2 generations, we were teachers. And then for 1 generation, we were tech entrepreneurs. So you can kind of, you can see the velocity of change in the modern workplace.
Yeah.
A sort of, sort of exponentially increasing change.
So you're riding all the important waves of the society.
Yes, exactly. Potatoes are still a big deal.
It is, yeah. Where do you study?
So I did my undergrad degree in Durham, and then went to Cambridge to do a master's and PhD.
Is there a reason why you didn't build your company in Cambridge, but here?
Yeah, so my co-founder and I, we had met in Cambridge, but we were both living in London, and we had a debate about it, and it felt to us that moving back to Cambridge would be a real hassle, and so we thought London. It's also a great place. It felt like a better place to meet people, I guess, but it was a bit of a toss-up.
And when you were studying, did you have some other ideas, some businesses, or some ideas to make something entrepreneurial? Where did it start in your life?
So yeah, I came out of university having studied machine learning and AI, and I had a real sense that these technologies were going to impact the world in a very serious way, and I kind of had this sense that probably there were so many industries that were ready to be disrupted by machine learning, and my particular application was NLP, natural language processing.
By machines?
Yeah, so natural language processing is basically using computers to do useful stuff with human languages. Oh, that's so much better. Oh,
yeah.
Oh, good work, that man. Yeah, so I came out thinking that this is a real opportunity. And the thing about machine learning, NLP, these types of technologies is incredibly versatile. So I was talking to a mate of mine about a company where you could use neural networks to analyze light diffraction through meat. So you could tell whether it was on the turn or not, because his parents were in the food industry. And so sort of looked at that. But I think the key for me was finding a co-founder who I really felt we were as committed as each other. We made a good team, and here was a problem that I could really see a solution to, which was typing on touchscreen devices.
And how did you meet your co-founder, now talking about it?
How did we meet?
Yeah.
We were basically in the same friendship circles. So we weren't great friends, but we knew each other, and I think we knew enough about each other to know that we sort of respected who we were, and we could probably work together.
And how did the idea come up of doing something with the NLP, language processing?
Yeah, so my co-founder was working for the civil service in London, and he was watching people typing on smartphones and kind of realized that actually this is really frustrating, and people had moved from physical keyboards or feature phones with physical keypads to typing on glass. And on the one hand, there was this tremendous opportunity, which is that you were no longer constrained to just a keyboard that always looked the same. You could change things, you could show words, but at the same time, it was actually pretty frustrating trying to type on glass. You didn't have the physical feedback, so real pros and cons. And he kind of saw people struggling and thought, would it be possible to build something that was better? So I was just visiting his house, actually visiting one of his housemates, who was also a friend of mine. And we got talking. And as I started to think about this problem, my initial insight was that this isn't really a problem about keyboards. It's a problem about language and how you capture the way people use language, and then how you embed that within an interface that allows a person to get the thoughts from their head onto their phone more easily. So those kind of insights that this is a real problem area and smartphones are exploding with, actually this is a problem about language and perhaps we can take some ideas. So I actually, I took some work that I'd done in the early 2000s in spam filtering. And my insight around spam filtering was that if you built a language model that was very good at representing a huge kind of background data set of spam, if you did the same with genuine email, but then for each of these big models, if you took another much smaller model that was trained on the way an individual user used email and the individual spam that they got, and if you combine these two models, then you got better performance than sort of lumping all the data together and training on everything. And that was the insight that I took into typing, which is that there are these background linguistic traits that you can capture using machine learning across a large language population. And then there are these very specific traits that each individual has. Mm-hmm. And using probability theory, you can model these two things in models that basically look the same. And then by combining them, you get a better predictive experience.
Okay, so you had the knowledge of how the language works, and you knew how to build systems which can help put it to good use. And you discovered together with your co-founder the problem. What happened afterwards? After just those informal chats about, did you guys want to do something about it, or were you just talking about it?
Yeah, so at the time I was in business with my PhD supervisor, and we were part of a consultancy partnership, sort of going into businesses and building NLP systems. Mm-hmm. So I was looking at some really interesting stuff, like whether you can train a computer to grade essays, for instance. That was one of the things I was looking at. And I was really interested in founding a company where I was able to really drive the direction. And that wasn't ever really going to happen with my PhD supervisor. But mm-hmm. So we felt like, well, we have a very, very, very small chance of turning this idea into a company, but let's take a few baby steps and see what happens. So we started doing some experiments, just trying to prove that if you built a strong predictive model, could you radically reduce the number of keystrokes people would have to use to enter text? Mm-hmm. And we kind of had this idea that, would it be possible, at least in theory, to create a keyboard where instead of typing out characters, that the sort of default mode of typing is to pick words, and it uses the evolving context to come up with the right word at the right time. And we did a few experiments around this, and probably spent 4 or 5 months just exploring that.
The two of you?
Yeah, just the two of us, yeah. And then about 3 or 4 months later, my co-founder came across an organization called the TSB, the Technology Strategy Board, who ran competitions for funding mm-hmm. early stage projects. Excuse me. And so we thought, we got nothing to lose. It was filling out one A4 sheet of paper as a proposal, and then you either win this competition, you get 15 grand, or you don't, and fine. Mm-hmm. Didn't waste too much time. So we did this, and the first time we applied, we won one of the grants, just a feasibility study. 15 grand seemed like an enormous amount of money.
Well, it is, right?
It is an enormous amount. We spent half of it on filing a patent, actually, straight away.
Oh, wow.
And the other half we used to sort of exploit some of our fellow students to build a keyboard prototype on top of the engine that I'd built by this stage. So that was kind of the first step. And then we ran out of that money. And I was working part-time at the time on doing this consultancy stuff, and my co-founder was full-time still in the civil service. And so we entered another competition, and this time it was actually a bit more effort. It was sort of a 3 or 4 page proposal, but we thought, seeing as we'd proven the interest through the feasibility study, we'd have a better chance. Anyway, we got rejected, and they said, you know, these are the reasons. So we completely rewrote it, sent it back in again, and got rejected again. And so we thought, well, okay, this is probably the end of the road, but we'll give it one more shot. And we rewrote it a 3rd time and sent it in again, and the 3rd time it got funded.
Was it TSB again?
TSB again, yeah.
Okay.
And I think if we hadn't got funded that 3rd time, we almost certainly would have stopped. And yeah, the fact that we pushed that 3 times probably was what led to us ultimately growing into a company.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody in the audience know the TSB and the TSB grants you guys can get? They do these, it can be a competition, it can be a program where you have a deadline, for example, by April you have to submit, and they can select you, and you can get up to, I think, £250,000, depending on the project. So it's a very good idea to start like this. I think you are the first founder which successfully completed these twice, right? Mm-hmm.
3 times actually.
3 times.
We did it again afterwards.
Okay. Wow.
Because I think there weren't any accelerators back then. There was very little sense of how you would go about getting funding. And it just happened that my co-founder, through his links with government, had come across the TSB.
Mm-hmm. So you got those 15,000 at the beginning. How much was the second one?
I think it was 25.
Mm-hmm. And did you have a company by then?
We actually had to incorporate a business in order to qualify for applying for the grant. So then we had to come up with a name. And I remember sitting at home with my family trying to come up with a name. And we actually incorporated as Touch Type Limited, which I thought was actually a pretty cool name, because obviously like touchscreen typing. No? Okay. I thought it was really good. My brother came up with this idea of calling the company Archetype, which is also quite good. Yeah?
Uh-huh.
No? Better? What's wrong with touch type? Who likes touch type? Yes, mate.
There you go.
Right. See me afterwards. See me afterwards. Got a job. Yeah.
So Touch Type was the first SwiftKey.
Touch Type Limited, and when we didn't come to SwiftKey until we launched our first app. And we never wanted to be an app company. We wanted to license the technology to the big mobile manufacturers, because what we set out to do was to change the way people typed on smartphones. That was the problem that we wanted to solve. And we felt like the best way to do this is to build this technology platform and then allow other people to build different keyboards on top of it. And the right business model seemed to be licensing to the mobile manufacturers, because that's where you get the really high volumes. And then we found out that it's really hard to sell into people like Samsung. Really, really hard. They'll just tell you, we don't need any more text input software. We're already doing fine. And so we decided that if we were going to persuade them, it would really, really help to have a consumer story behind what we were doing. So we built an app, and then we had to think of a name for the app. And we didn't want to call it Touch Type because the company was called Touch Type. And so we went round and round for ages trying to come up with a name. And we were working with a design agency who were going to help us write the logo. And we just went round and round and round. And we came up with ideas like Thought Stream. What do you think about that?
I don't like it.
Too big,
too complicated, yeah.
Like Wordflow, that was another one, which interestingly Microsoft then used 4 years later. But, and anyway, we went round and round so many times. Wordsmith was actually the one I really liked. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
You know, on this topic, if I forget, we had here on this stage last March the founder of Moo.com.
Oh yeah.
And he was having a similar problem. Moo.com was originally called Pleasure Cards. And he had to explain why. And the reason why is because it's supposed to be fun. So the opposite of business cards are pleasure cards. But it didn't work, and then he had to change it to Moodle.
That's got like CD phone box written all over it.
So you found that you wanted to go to speak with the manufacturers, but you didn't get far.
No, we spent quite a lot. We spent the first sort of 12 months or so touring around pitching PowerPoint decks that showed how much more powerful the prediction engine was. And it was just really hard to get people to bite on that. So we discovered that Android, which was about 1% market share at the time, we discovered that they had this pluggable keyboard framework where you could build a keyboard, and then if you installed the keyboard, you could use it across all your applications.
Yeah.
And that was a real turning point for us, because we realized that, like, I think Samsung, Sony, and about 5 other OEMs, mobile manufacturers, had signed up for the Open Handset Alliance, which is Google's Android thing. And we realized that if we could build this piece of software, then we could get the guys who actually make the decisions in these companies to try it out themselves. And hopefully we could get some internal advocates.
And this is back in 2009, 2008?
It's 2010.
10.
So we launched...
So there's already lots of iOS devices on the market, and
yeah.
some
iOS
Androids.
Was pretty big. iOS was maybe 25% of the smartphone.
You didn't want to go into the iOS market first?
We couldn't. So there's no pluggable keyboard framework for iOS until iOS 8. And arguably there still isn't a stable one, but that's another question.
Okay, so you started with Android. Back then it was small. It was kind of it was much smoother on the devices, right?
Yeah, I think we had a feel that we were onto something, but I certainly didn't have any confidence that it would really take off. And then we shipped a really ropey beta in July 2010, which all the design work had been done by a school grad at my dad's school. I think we'd done the whole thing for 300 quid. And I built the engine that sat behind it, and I got a coding agency in Argentina to build the keyboard. And they said, oh yeah, we can do it for 15 grand. And so we used 15 grand of our second 25 grand grant.
That's a big chunk for that, yeah.
Big chunk, yeah. And now, having a few years on, having spent something like £7 million on the keyboard, 15 grand was slightly optimistic. But they built something that was basically the Android open source keyboard with a few tweaks, a few hacks, I should say. And we launched this as a beta, and it was really unstable, but the feedback we got was incredible. Like, people saying, this is so much better than the native Android keyboard. And I think then, sort of watching people's response on Twitter, that gave me a feel for actually, maybe there's something really interesting in this. Okay,
it's definitely truth. Now, when you had this keyboard, what is it? Because you're the CTO of the company, right? What was your technical strategy for making it happen? Before you said you want to go to manufacturers and give them a piece of code, or was it supposed to be an application?
I mean, the great thing was that the product lead at Samsung was using Android phone, and you could just say to him, you download this from the Android market, which is what it was called at the time.
And check it out.
So it's easy. Like, distribution through app stores is such a gift.
Yeah.
Like, it's really, really hard to get visibility now because there's so many apps, but it's just so much easier than it used to be.
Yes. So this is 2010, and
2010, yeah.
You made the prototype for Android, and you had people testing it, and there was a good feedback. What happened afterwards?
So what actually happened was that the first thing I did was to write to 2 Android blogs and say, can you post a blog that says there's a young company who wants some testers for their product? We got about 600 people through that.
Wow.
600 email addresses, and I put them into a Google group, and then we kept the sign up, and word of mouth spread a bit, and we grew that a bit, and then we put it onto the Android market in beta as a free keyboard. And we told all these people to go and download it. And that kind of pushed it up the charts a bit. And then we grew that group from about 2,500 to 5,000. And so then when we went to a paid product in September of 2010, we emailed all of the beta users, which is now an email list of about 5,000 people, told them all to go and download the paid app at the same time. So they all went and did that. That pushed it up the charts. So we got, I think we did hit the #1 paid app slot at that point. And it was much easier to do that back then because there were far fewer Android users. But that gave us some visibility that we then built on and sort of iterated. On the back of that, about 18 months later, we closed some of the big OEM deals, which was our original vision. And that was sort of 2012-ish.
Okay, was it before the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona or after that?
The Mobile World Congress in 2010 was where we went to publicly launch the company. And it was quite funny because at that stage, there were only there were me and John and then 2 employees in the business. One of them was helping us with office management stuff, just logistics, and the other was the chief software architect. And we wanted to try and present a good image at the Congress. So we went there with 5 people, and one of them was an investor. One of them was a guy who was doing some marketing consultancy for us, and the other one was my housemate. And so we went with a bigger team.
Yeah.
So, and the idea was, you know, we've got 5 people at the Congress, and obviously there's a big back office staff back at home. And we needed to make business cards for everybody. And my housemate obviously didn't actually have a role in the company. But we wanted to make business cards, and it's like, what title are we going to give this guy? And so we gave him the title of Vice President. So we made 1,000 business cards with Andy Smith, Vice President. And he kept getting asked, so what are you Vice President of? And so the joke was that he was the VP of FA. So we made a lot of mistakes. You know, we brought an insane number of business cards. We would have had to have been giving out business cards at a rate of 1 every 5 seconds to get through all of the ones we brought. And I nearly got stopped as a terrorist on the way over because my hand luggage was packed with business cards, which is about the same density as Semtex.
Oh, wow.
But that Congress is where we sort of publicly launched the company and gave out a small fraction of these cards.
So you started getting some traction on Android, and you started doing some deals with the OEM manufacturers.
Yep.
And today, what are the numbers today? Like you have Android users, you have iOS users. What do they look like?
So we have the original vision was to create this platform where people could build keyboards, and that happens through the licensing business, and that now touches somewhere between 250 and 300 million devices globally. We also have an app business which on Android we're getting something in the order of 50 million downloads a year, and iOS is much smaller. I think we've had about 6 million so far.
Which is impressive in its own right. When did you think this is something which is beyond just helping people type faster? Because would they really pay for it? You said you launched a paid version.
Yeah, we launched.
What was the feedback from that?
We launched a paid version because we wanted to prove to the OEMs that people would pay for it, even though they already had a keyboard. So it's a great story to be able to take to Samsung and say, you know, look at all these users who have paid for this product, despite the fact that you're already shipping your own keyboard.
Yeah.
And so if they're paying $5, perhaps you should think about paying 10 cents a unit. So that was why we did it. And yeah, I think certainly when we first went onto the Android market, there was such a big delta between the Android keyboard, which now is actually pretty good, but back then was really quite horrible. The people were quite willing to pay for it.
So you became the #1 paid app as well?
Yes.
Which is a strong argument for the manufacturers to say, hey guys, people really want to use it.
That's the consumer story. And what I always say to anybody who's looking to license, think about how to generate a consumer story, because people are much more swayed by that, obviously, than they are by a PowerPoint deck where you say how good you are.
Yes, think about how you can generate a consumer story. It's a very good advice. Guys, if you want to be a bit more active, our hashtag is StartupGrind, as you can see over there. What we also do is, you can see the screen over here. If you want to ask something, I can promise you that the top questions which you ask, the most popular ones, we will be asking. All you need to do is just, if you can pull out your mobile phone, you can do it now. Just pull out your mobile phone and open your browser. No need to download anything. Just open your browser, and what you do is you just go to this link over here, sli.do/sgl. That's it. There's no login, no password. You can just open the link and just start typing your questions. And if you see the other ones on there, you can just vote for the ones which you like. And the most popular, we will be asking Ben. So now we have this consumer story, and you made your point that this is something important. What you said is also quite key. Android used to be bad, but they are quite good now. Mm-hmm. How nervous are you that one day your technology will be obsolete because Google, Apple will be doing the same?
Yeah, quite nervous. I think in some ways it's good because, well, in technology, you have to be nervous. So Andy Grove, who was the sort of legendary Intel, I think he was number 3 at Intel and ran the company for a long time.
Yeah.
He wrote the book Only the Paranoid Survive about the technology industry, and that's absolutely right. So being paranoid is the right thing to do. We have very good reason to be paranoid because we're competing with companies like Google and Apple, who are quite well funded. And that's, that means that we have to really stay on our toes. We have to be thinking about what is it that we're doing now that means that in 12, 24 months' time, we'll still have a solution that's better.
Yeah.
But it's one of the biggest challenges.
Mm-hmm. I was actually asking a few people about you who know you from the industry, and one of them, I promise not to name him, ask Ben how many times Google offered to buy you. What is the answer?
The answer is some number between 0 and 10.
What's the reason for fighting it so far?
Well, if that number's 0, then the reason is self-evident. I can't really answer the question directly, but okay. I can say I think actually probably we would have been acquired quite early had we not been a London company and had we not been focused on B2B licensing. So I think whether we would have wanted to be acquired or not, and we certainly didn't really set out with that intention. I think being London in some ways protects you against acquisition because it's just a lot more complicated. And yeah, I guess we've always felt like let's see how far we can take it. Mm-hmm. And at some point, when we feel like we can't take it any further, then probably we will succumb.
Because the natural way would be, okay, we're doing this thing, we are doing amazing. Maybe one of the big guys can buy us, Apple or Google. But if you want to be a nice, successful standalone company, maybe you wanna keep walking as far as you can get. Mm-hmm. What I like is you say about SwiftKey that you using artificial intelligence to help people.
Yeah.
Is it just about the keyboard, or the vision is much bigger?
So we would love to be able to work on a broad range of different ideas, different projects, different products. Mm-hmm. We have a very clear sense that for any startup, you have to have a laser focus. Yeah. And like starting too early in terms of exploring alternative ideas is a dangerous thing to do. Mm-hmm. And we have tried a few different things. But there's no question in my mind that the target we have is all about creating a platform whereby we can try out a wide range of different things. But we'll always be focused around using AI to build innovative products. Like that's the identity of the business. But yeah, I would love to be firing off 10, 20 different projects every year, looking at different things.
You mentioning you're doing the language processing and helping people make their lives richer. Are you always about typing, or you think also about things like Siri, where people, because you're over language, right?
Yeah.
What do you see? How do you see the language processing in terms of the voice commands?
So I think people ask us about voice a lot, and we've thought about voice and whether that's worth investing in. And what we actually feel is that the really interesting part of this, and this is actually a real change. So we set out to build the technology platform for the future of typing.
Yeah.
And we kind of feel like, okay, we did that. So what's next? And the way we feel now is that the keyboard is the portal for people doing inputs on devices. And because of the flexibility of the touchscreen, there's a lot you can do with a keyboard. And what we feel is that actually the interesting thing is to own that piece of real estate and what you can do with that. So there's a few interesting things. Over the last few months, you've seen quite a lot of keyboards be released that are actually not focused on typing at all. They're focused on sharing content. So whether it's animated GIFs or memes or emoji. And that's just an example of the keyboard as a portal for richer content sharing.
Yeah.
And it's actually that sort of owning the keyboard as an evolving tool for getting your thoughts into your phone and being creative in how you share them. That's kind of where we see the future of our company. So voice is a service that a lot of companies provide through APIs that's actually quite different from that vision of the keyboard as a consumer-facing opportunity. So at the moment, we're less interested in voice, more interested in what you can do with keyboards.
So you're starting with keyboard, you want to focus on that, and then you want to expand from this?
Yeah, but what the sort of technology challenge that we have is how can you most accurately predict what people are going to say? And actually solving that challenge is in the limit is a very hard AI challenge.
It is.
And a lot of the technology that we're working on for that is also very applicable to voice or machine translation or text classification, a lot of different types of
This is one of the ways how you can stay ahead of the game before the big guys, because you're so focused and you are decently big now. You have some funding as well. Is this one of the ways where you can really stay ahead of the game and be better and give a reason to people that we predict better what you're going to say?
Yeah, exactly. Like at our size, staying focused on doing what we do better, that's the only way we can survive.
Is it such a hard game for Apple to catch up with you or Google to catch up with you on the keyboard side?
Fiendishly difficult.
Okay.
Well, so I think the thing about building keyboards is it's much more difficult than it looks. And in particular, building sort of global language coverage and the interplay between different languages, it's a really hard problem. And so, you know, we know how difficult it is. And the big companies, yeah, if they put their best people on it, they could. There's no question they could do as good a job as we do.
That's interesting. Talking about this problem of a keyboard and moving slowly towards funding and finance, because lots of people here. Are there any guys in the audience who are planning to raise some money? Talk to investors, looking for investors? Anybody in the audience? Okay, we have a bunch of people. So, how difficult was it for you to convince people, convince investors that there is money behind working on keyboards?
Yeah, it was actually quite difficult. Particularly because in 2009, when we started looking for funding after the TSB grants ran out, there wasn't an early stage VC community or seed community. In fact, our first VC were Octopus, and we were their first seed investment, and the ecosystem just wasn't there. I think actually it's much better now, and there's more awareness of how important it is to put money into pre-revenue companies. But also, if you go to the Valley, you've got a lot of competition, but there's a real mindset that if you've got an idea that's optimized for growth, that people will put $10–15 million into that. Whereas traditionally the scene in the UK has been don't optimize for growth, optimize for a business model that you can prove, come back when you're generating some revenue, and then we'll give you some more money. It's a very different kind of mindset.
And how did you prove your business model it works?
So we kind of have different business models, and the licensing model was really clear. You just, it's sort of big multi-million-dollar, multi-year deals. On the consumer side, it's much more interesting. So the question of how do you monetize a keyboard is something we're still exploring, and we've got a lot of ideas around that. But we're not yet at a stage where we can say this is how you do it, and nobody's really done it before. So that's both exciting and challenging.
I think one of the smart ways you already did is you made it as a paid app, and you were the most popular paid app, which is kind of a very elegant way of proving something works there.
It was a great early stage tactic, yeah.
But then you changed the paid app into a free app.
Yeah.
And this is very, very interesting from the marketing perspective. Why was that?
So when we decided that the future of the business was as much, if not more, in the consumer space, and actually owning that keyboard interaction, as well as just distributing the technology, we realized very quickly that with a paid app, it's just not possible to get the kind of volume that will change the world. However, we were at the top of the Google Play charts for a number of years, and we're still getting only a fraction of the volume of the apps that were in the top 50, top 100 in the free charts.
Yeah.
So we just
what kind of numbers are we talking about, if it's safe to say?
Well, I think in general the top paid apps are generating maybe 3,000 or 4,000 downloads a day, whereas the top free apps are generating maybe 300,000.
Yeah.
So it's just a completely different scale. So 100 times in the free app market. So our goal was very simple. We believe that there's a really interesting strategic value in owning this keyboard input space. And the only way we're going to get the keyboard app distributed more widely is to go free. And so I don't know whether you've read the How Google Works slideshow, which I really like, which Eric Schmidt recently shared. But they have this thing about if you're in technology companies, you should optimize for growth, not for revenue. So find a way to orient your business around growing fast, and then you need to have concepts about what revenue model you're going to use, but focus on growth, not revenue.
So, and your answer was let's go free from paid and let's see what happens. Did you have some plan B if it doesn't work?
Well, we still had the licensing business.
Okay.
So that was still kind of the engine rooms, and we used that to fund a lot of what we did. So it wasn't a complete gamble, but it's still, it's startups are all about making gambles. You roll the dice and make an educated guess.
Yes. So you then made it free, and what was the uptake?
Yeah, it was good. We immediately were getting about sort of 40 times the volume per day. Okay. Almost straight away. So it was the right. But
no issues with the platform capacity and technology, making sure you can really fulfill those orders.
Yeah, we've had some issues, but just about survived.
Any lessons you want to share with the audience how how to avoid gray hair or being stressed too much?
Don't think there's any way to avoid that. I mean, the best thing you can do to avoid grey hair is to hire the best people. And yeah, a lot of the stuff that you do that means that your product is successful at scale, you actually have to have done way before. And getting in people who know how to build systems at scale, that's 90% of the challenge.
Right now, how many people are working on developing on technology side of the business?
We've got about 70 engineers, about 10 people in design, 10 people in product management, something like that.
Do you have any R&D department looking after what's going to happen behind the corner?
We do, but I feel quite strongly that research should be very product focused. And what I don't want is a separate research function. So I have a head of research, but he doesn't actually have a team as such. He coordinates projects that have a research focus across the company. And we try and get the people who are going to engineer a particular feature, once it comes to the product, we try and get them to lead the research.
So it's just product-based research?
Yeah, so
and looking at,
so let's say the engineers who build the core algorithms that make up the engine that sits behind the keyboard. These guys they're really smart, and if we want to research a new type of language model structure, for instance, then we try and get those guys to look into that question, rather than somebody who's never actually built a commercial piece of software. So that's the principle. Okay.
When we look at your product, it's an app, right? And it's an app which runs on the background of the operating system, so we can use it the same keyboard for different applications.
Yep.
Is it a good thing that people can use it across all the apps, or it's a bad thing that you run into some OS issues?
It makes it a really difficult app to develop, because the sort of cross product of the number of different environments that it has to work successfully in, and the number of versions of Android and the number of different devices is a huge number. So testing is really difficult. But if you want to build a keyboard, that's what you have to do. My advice would be, don't try and build a keyboard.
What I like about this business model is the fact that you can install it, you don't have it, and it works, right? And what is the chance that the application is uninstalled from the device? In your case, just look into this quickly.
Yeah, it would be great if we could find a way to make it impossible to uninstall it. That would really be good.
Okay.
But that's probably not going to happen. So yeah, it's interesting. But being a keyboard, there's a real benefit and there's a real cost. So once someone switches to our keyboard, if you're on Android, then the good thing is it pops up every time you want to do text input. But that also means that if you're really used to your keyboard and the question mark keys over here, and you've got really accustomed to that, then a new keyboard that has a different type of layout, that can immediately present a sort of cognitive load challenge. So traditionally, keyboards actually have incredibly high churn because people are just used to the muscle memory of their existing keyboard. So we have to overcome that, which is a challenge. But it's a challenge among many challenges.
Let's look at the questions from Slido. We have one question from Anna. What's the next innovation for touch input keyboards? Will the QWERTY keyboard survive?
So the way I think about this is that people have been using their hands to create written language for a very long time. And so I think the future of input is multimodal. So there are some scenarios where voice is absolutely the right way to do input, and some scenarios where it isn't. And so my guess is that some kind of gesture-based typing style input is going to stick with us for a while. And to be honest, it's probably going to be QWERTY because it's proven to be a stubborn thing to shift. And actually, there are things that are a bit better, but no one's come up with anything that's sufficiently better to dislodge it. So I'm going to predict that for the next 5 years, we'll still be using QWERTY keyboards. That's
interesting. Now, when I look back at SwiftKey's performance, you said you were testing it and you set up this user group on Google, and those guys helped you test it, and you kind of built a early adopters community.
Yeah.
Those guys helped you also to become visible because they downloaded the paid app as well. What are some other ways how you really accelerated your growth in terms of usage or take-up?
So the thing about, I think it's genuinely very hard to engineer anything that accelerates growth. I think basically word of mouth, and if you're building an application that has a sort of inbuilt network effect, like a messaging app or something, and it takes off, that obviously stimulates growth, but there's also a huge barrier to that growth actually happening. So I really think that growth is something that you can optimize and you can sort of incrementally improve, and we try and do that through good use of social media, through making it easy to share the app, and we could do a lot better with that.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, none of that stuff is going to make a massive difference. It's either a product that people want to use and they want to use it enough that they're willing to talk about it with their friends, or it isn't. And there's just not a lot you can sort of vary around that.
Yeah, I agree. You made the product really good. You tweaked it. You were making it better gradually, step by step. And then once the product is great and people really like it, and you got the feedback from them, they were downloading it, and now we have so many people using it. Now you can do some nice marketing actions. You did the keyboard promotion with Disney, right? How did it work for you?
So we sort of had this internal debate about how much to focus on things that might appeal to people other than me and a few others in the company. And you know, if I'm honest, the last thing I want to be doing is using a keyboard with Elsa, the frozen princess, in it. But we're kind of very aware that the user group that we appeal to predominantly is quite sort of tech heavy, quite early adopter focused, and we've been doing these experiments to try and work out whether there's a way to appeal to other types of audiences, and that was what that was about. I'm pleased to say it didn't take off massively well, so we probably won't have to do too much of that in future, but we'll see.
Do you plan any other marketing actions, like some big promotions, or you did some which were working extremely well, which you want to share?
We do a lot. So we found actually that focusing on the tech press is really good because people are desperate to churn out articles, and oftentimes people are reading the tech press online, and then they can link straight through to a download URL for your app or something like that. So we found that worked pretty well, and it's quite cheap. You just build relationships with people at TechCrunch. And then
how do you do it?
You need to have somebody who's really good at building relationships. And one of our very first hires was a guy who's an exceptional networker. So he would go to the right events, get in with the right people, and then he'd just be able to send out an email to his contacts at TechCrunch and get them to publish something. It's also old-fashioned relationship building.
And of course it helps when you go to Mobile World Congress and you win the most innovative app.
Yeah, that was 2012. That was very exciting for us. And it's really hard to know how much awards really help, but they look great in email signatures and that type of thing. So it's worth focusing on for that reason.
Do they attract the right kind of audience in terms of journalists approaching you, as opposed to you have to send out press releases?
Yeah, it gives journalists some fodder, definitely. but it's hard to equate this. So we're now more and more thinking about how does our marketing activity directly impact on downloads. And that's when you're a young startup, a lot of what you do is about PR and brand.
Yeah.
And you want to try and get the world to take you seriously, and then after a while you achieve that, and then you're more focused on, okay, actually this probably isn't going to move the needle anymore, so let's think about how we get to this segment of users, and does this activity really drive downloads or not.
You mentioned you were targeting deliberately those manufacturers. Are you still doing this, or it's less important now?
Yeah, we're still working with I think 20 different manufacturers.
Oh wow!
So it's still quite a big deal.
How do you manage to work with so many manufacturers on so many platforms and stay focused?
Well, the vast majority of those are Android, not all, but it's a question of trying to minimize the amount of customization the product needs. And we're really focused on that, so just try and distribute one product to everybody.
So those are those big hardware and software partners. Do you have any big partnerships with other app providers who are also having huge customer bases to cross-promote or cooperate or partner?
Not really. I mean, we found that outside of the major app stores, Google Play and the Apple App Store, there aren't. So we're on the Samsung store, for instance, which has been okay for us actually, and they've promoted us a bit because they're one of our partners. But it's very heavily biased towards the big stores, and there isn't a lot outside of that. There isn't a lot that's really worth doing.
It's just the basic marketing and the upsell marketing. And do you do any paid acquisition of customers? We
don't. We've done a few things like paid Facebook campaigns, which works okay, but you really have to be able to grow organically. And usually what happens is you prove that organic growth, and then you take on a shed load of money and spend it on UA to accelerate that.
Okay. Now when you talk about money, you raised so far over 23 million?
Yeah, about $23 million.
And the last round was a year and a half ago of 17.5?
Yeah.
How did you spend the money, or do you plan to do any other rounds?
Yeah, about half of it was on donuts, I think.
There's a lot of donuts.
A lot of donuts, yeah. That's the only way you can attract engineers these days.
So mostly it's on
endless donuts.
On the technology.
Well, so I guess the reason we raised was so that we could focus on building new stuff, and most of that is based around the keyboard because that's the core focus, that's the core vision.
Yeah.
But yeah, we try and spend as much as we possibly can on actually building things, and that was a major focus.
I think I was kind of impressed when I was looking at your the list of investors. You mentioned Octopus, you have Index, you have Accel Partners. How did you get introduced to these kind of guys and close deals with them successfully?
Well, with Octopus, we actually went through the website. I think we're the only company that's ever succeeded at going through a VC website. But that was really early. What happens is the more you work within, particularly the London tech scene, which is quite small and focused, the more you get to know everybody. So by the time we did the round with Index and Accel, which was 2013, we had just spent a lot of time speaking to people. So at that stage, we had a brand that was recognized, and it was a case of, it was pretty easy for us to get a meeting, so then go and pitch, and thankfully
So you were going
worked.
to go to networking events or some...
Yeah, I kind of loathe networking events actually, personally, but you have to do a lot of that in the early days, and then after that, you identify the people you want to speak to, and you find a way to go and speak to them.
How do you select the ones which works for you, where you could meet the right people?
Which events?
Yeah.
Well, I think that Mobile World Congress...
So conferences, congresses.
Yeah, because what you do is you go there and you try and get a meeting with the right person in Sony or whoever it is.
Beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. So you make a lot of effort beforehand. You say, I'm going to be here, I want to have a chat. And half of them you fail on, and the ones you fail, you try and pester them when you get there. So that's the tactics.
That's very smart. And now you got all the funding. Let's talk a little bit about the company. So you have this great product. You have a bunch of engineers. When you grow the company, when you talked about it a little bit at the beginning, how do you hire for the right kind of people? And what is the corporate culture of SwiftKey?
Yeah, the culture is all based around donuts, essentially. How do you hire people? So the thing we were talking about, Marion and I, at the start is, I really think we missed a real opportunity, which is to reinforce how critical referrals are, staff referrals. And what happened with us was we had our network mostly based around Cambridge. And so we hired some great people, and then that network ran out. So we went to agencies and we started hiring through agencies. And I was astounded the other day. I was speaking to a guy who used to head up hiring at Dropbox in the States. And he was saying that for companies like Facebook, their referral rate is still around 60 to 70%, like all their new staff. And I think that's sort of unheard of in this country. It's just really rare. We don't have that culture. And the challenge for me was, can you create a culture whereby people understand that they're a software engineer and they're a recruiter, and everybody's a recruiter, and bringing good people into the business is the most important thing you can do. Now, we missed that a bit, and I'm trying to reintroduce that culture now. But for us, we found some really good agencies, and we kind of built up the team through that way. But I do think there are probably better ways to do it. I mean, we spend a lot of time going to campus events, milk rounds, that type of thing, and that's really good.
And your team right now is how many people?
About 160.
And do you feel like you can get all the talent you need, or you kind of have the barrier where you need to go and look for people from other countries or other continents?
Yeah, we do have a lot of people who are not just from the UK. I think there are 33 different languages spoken in the office.
Oh wow!
And yeah, so it's definitely not the case that there's a never-ending flow of talents and you just pick out, the best people. It's really quite hard, and it's getting harder in London to find really good people. And obviously it's different for different things, but it's sort of quite hard for everything, actually.
We have a question here from Slido, from Matilda. How did you scale your engineering teams, and what challenges have you encountered doing so?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the first thing I did recognize was that I didn't know how to hire good engineers. And so I hired somebody who I knew was able to recognize a good engineer. And that's not just, are they good at coding and problem solving, but it's, are they likely to be a good team player as well? So I think hiring somebody to focus on hiring is one of the most important things you could do. But obviously you can't do that straight away. That would be overkill. And using your own networks to find some really good people, I think is a really good place to start. And then you get into, when you get to a bit bigger, you get into how do you actually structure the organization so that you don't end up grinding to a halt. And these are really big, hard questions which there's no silver bullet for, but it's something that sort of talking to companies at each different stage is really helpful for understanding how to maximize that stage.
Yeah. And when you talk about the company's growth, in terms of teams and places where you're based, right now you are in Seoul, South Korea, you are in San Francisco and London. Do you plan to expand to other cities?
We've got a guy called Jackie Chan in China.
How do you do?
What's amazing about that is that he's the second Jackie Chan that we've hired. And none of them was the real Jackie Chan, so we kept getting excited. And
they're not twins.
They're not twins. No, we do have. So we have Jackie in China, and I can imagine probably growing that out a bit because there's a lot of stuff happening in mobile manufacturers in China at the moment.
Is that the reason because you want to be close to the manufacturers, or what's the reason for setting up operations somewhere else when you have an app business?
Seoul is all about manufacturers. China is kind of the same.
Yeah.
The West Coast is all about being plugged into that ecosystem. That's the heart of mobile software.
How often do you travel to the West Coast?
Probably 3 times a year.
Okay.
For me.
For some conferences, or you just go and set up some meetings?
Yeah, often to go to a conference and see the team. I try and mix a few things together.
Okay. Now, another question from Slido is, please, can you make your TSB application public? It's a very honest question.
So I've just seen that question. Why not? Why not? I'm trying to think if maybe. I don't know.
Okay. You will tell us later.
Think about it.
Now, when you speak with really interesting people...
Actually, sorry, just a quick question. If the person who asked that question messages me directly, I might be able to send you the application, which may be helpful.
That is nice. Thanks for that.
For a small fee. That was a joke.
50% of the fee raised from TSB. Now, when we talk about people like you, these guys have always learned tremendous amount of knowledge. Who helped you when you were starting? Did you have some mentors, or how did you become so successful?
So we did have some mentors, and I think probably for me and John, we just spent a huge amount of time learning everything we could from people. So talking to a lot of people, sort of recognizing the fact that we basically knew nothing at the time, and that's just something you have to do in the early days. I think that helped us to learn, but also we just learned by making loads of mistakes, and we didn't really have any clear mentors. I had my PhD supervisor on the tech side, so it was sort of that combination really of just trying to learn everything we could from people we spoke to, and then gradually building up our networks.
And right now, when you are running a big company, do you mentor some other people as well?
Yeah, I guess there's a huge amount of time taken just mentoring people within the company, and actually I've just started doing coaching as well, because after 5 or 6 years, you realise there's actually a hell of a lot more I can learn, and so that's been really useful for me. But yeah, I mentor when I can.
Nice. After mentorship, one of the things which I'd like to talk about is what does the future holds for SwiftKey, which is also a question from Slido.
Yeah.
Where do you see SwiftKey in 3-4 years' time from now?
So I would love us. So I talked about how we wanted to build this tech platform. We kind of felt, yeah, we've done that. I would now love us to be the most used keyboard in the world. So I don't know what percentage of the market that means, but it would mean certainly getting to sort of hundreds of millions of users of the application. And the exciting thing about that is that no one knows what keyboards are going to evolve into, but with that kind of reach, that we play a really big part in what the keyboard of the future looks like. So that's kind of where I see us. I hope that we'll also have invested a lot of time and energy in future-looking R&D on the tech side. So how do we do prediction better? There's lots of interesting stuff around AI that we could talk about.
What happens after the keyboards?
So there's lots of different ways we could go, and I think the only thing I can say really at this stage is that the type of behavioral modeling that we use with the keyboard, which is based on machine learning, based on NLP, I think there are a lot of other applications where if you get it right, you could tie together and do a really good job of making people's general smartphone usage more intuitive. We had this concept of making it more human, sort of software that adapts to you rather than the other way around. So that's the kind of direction that we would want to take things. But we've got a really big challenge to sort of nail the keyboard market first.
Yeah. No, I think it's very very important to just really stay focused and you're doing the right thing and doing it the right way. When we talk about the future of SwiftKey and AI, now there are plenty of articles being written about let's be careful with AI. Artificial intelligence is something which we have to be really careful. Elon Musk, people of a similar kind, Stephen Hawking, which your company helped type twice as fast. He's warning about AI. What do you think about this?
So I was interested actually. Let's do a little straw poll. Put your hand up if you're worried that AI is going to wipe out humanity in the next 100 years. Put your hand up if you're not worried about that. Okay, so the popular opinion has yet to shift, but you're absolutely right. So one of the challenges that we often get is people saying, "Well, aren't you just a keyboard company?" So in some ways, it was kind of helpful, Stephen Hawking saying, you know, it's great to work with SwiftKey, but I'm worried that this technology is going to kill us all in 50 years. And so that's a nice sort of rebuttal to the just a keyboard argument. But yeah, it's really interesting to me how there's been a wave of public, you know, well-known public voices talking about the danger of AI. And I think there's good reason for this. And in fact, I think if you believe that general AI, which is not the kind of narrow AI that we have today, which is good at solving specific problems, but AI that is able to take input data from multiple different sources and most importantly to create internal conceptual structures that generalize across multiple different domains. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. So at the moment, a neural network that is trained on YouTube videos to recognize cats, what a cat looks like what the concept of a cat looks like within that structure is fundamentally different to what the concept of a cat looks like inside a neural network that's trained on language. So the word cat and the image of a cat, they're two different internal structures. Once we are able to build algorithms that can combine these structures into one, then it becomes a hell of a lot more powerful. Now, that itself is just a stepping stone on the way to the kind of general AI that has the potential to go super intelligent, and you know,
like the big data kind of AI.
Yeah, well, the sort of singularity type AI, where it's self-improving, and then suddenly, before we know it, it's 1,000 times more intelligent than humanity, and then it sort of thinks about us the way we do about ants. That's the sort of dystopian.
It doesn't make
picture.
you nervous?
Well, no, I think we have to be actually really careful about that. So if you believe that that's where AI is going to get to, then I think you have to believe that that's actually a fairly significant danger. But I think the thing we have to recognize is that getting there is actually a huge leap from where we are today. So Kurzweil talks about the law of accelerating returns, which is the exponential increase in computing power. And the problem with that is that actually there's some good signs that Moore's law is now really starting to break down. So at the moment, the thing that's driven Moore's law is actually the cost of fabricating a transistor on a silicon chip. And the cost of doing so has been halving approximately every 18 months. And actually that's now stopped. So Moore's law is basically dead. And we don't actually have any known way of getting around that. Now we can talk about DNA computers and quantum computing and everything else, but
quantum computing, yeah.
That's actually still a long way off. So the law of accelerating returns is not really a law, it's more like a market trend that may now be slowing down. But even within that, the quest towards intelligence does not scale with the number of transistors you can fit onto a silicon chip. This is a fundamentally different type of computing.
True, but by the fact that, for example, it's expected that by 2025, the artificial intelligence will be as smart as we are.
Yeah.
And because its growth can be exponential, suddenly it can be, as you said, 1,000 times more intelligent.
Yeah. So that's the worry, but I guess what I'm saying is, I think that's actually extremely optimistic in terms of our acceleration in AI research. So the history of AI has been characterized by over-optimism.
Yeah.
It's always about 20 years away. So, you know, if you're around in the 80s, then it's always sort of 20 years before we have proper robots.
Yeah. Are companies like yours who are working with AI, collaborating together, like DeepMind is based here, which Google recently bought for, I think, 300 million, and DeepMind is behind the processing of visual images?
So I love DeepMind. Demis is a friend of mine.
Yeah.
And I love what they're doing. I think Google are rightly investing in AI companies, as are many of the big firms. And that's kind of getting us on route. So the stuff that, I think it's actually Kurzweil's Google Brain project that's doing the stuff around image recognition. But it's the same stuff. It's neural networks in one form or another. And there's some really, really exciting progress being made. But it's still a very, very long way off the kind of stuff that the human brain can do.
And you guys are working together with companies like DeepMind, or it's just informal?
It's just informal, yeah.
Okay. My last question before we go and ask some questions from the audience is, if you look back at SwiftKey and you had a chance to do it again, what would you do differently?
I wouldn't have taken those business cards to Mobile World Congress. I've learned so many things, made so many mistakes. I think I talked a bit about sort of missing the referral thing.
Yeah,
that's a big thing I would want to change. I think I just have so much better concept of what's needed for different roles within the business, and having actually worked with people and knowing what it is that slows you down. That's such a big part of it. Like if you're building an engineering team and you build a load of low-level dependencies between teams, that's a nightmare. Trying to get 5 different stakeholders to buy into something, you really want to try and avoid that, and build these teams with vertical responsibility and try and keep the sort of the interface between the rest of the company as minimal and constrained as possible. Things like that I just didn't really have any idea of at the start.
Okay.
I hope I'd be able to do a lot better second time.
I'm sure you will. So let's go take some questions from the audience. We did some on slide, or there's one over there. Do the mics work? Okay, perfect. So let's jump into it.
Hi there. Going back to your point about the AI singularity a little bit, I mean, maybe it's a bit off topic, it's quite fun. The show of hands question you asked earlier, I think, depending on the kind of audience you have, you get a very different answer right now.
Yeah.
One question that I've been trying to put to people like yourself involved in AI is, when do you think we're going to see the first AI rights protest? So I guess that's when kind of the zeitgeist is tipping the other way, right?
Yeah, so you're talking about rights for the AI as such.
Yeah, in the same way you kind of see animal rights protests and these kind of things.
Yeah, that's
people laugh now, right?
That's a really interesting question, partly because it raises the question of when does an agent deserve to have rights? And that's kind of something that people disagree on, but it feels like, okay, it's obviously related to animacy, but does it need to be related to self-awareness? So, you know, do we confer rights on animals because we believe that to some degree at least they're self-aware, and are we therefore looking for some kind of spark of self-awareness in AI agents? I think these questions are sort of such interesting speculation. I think we're at least 30 years away from achieving anything that we will debate is self-consciousness within AIs. Yeah, that's partly based on the pattern of history that I see, but I'm going to say sort of 30 years.
Okay. While we going to go for next question, there's a quick one here. Are you guys hiring?
Yes.
Next question. So what kind of people you hiring for?
We love to get some Android and iOS engineers.
So we can do two things. One, either you can tweet out to Ben if you are interested, or you can tweet out to Ben if you know somebody who is good. Let's do some referrals.
Hi, you mentioned patented something early on.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of machine learning algorithms that are out there, and everyone knows about them, and you have an application. What is it that you were able to patent about what you were coming up with specifically? Because that's quite a difficult thing from what I understand. You're saying, I've got this algorithm that everyone knows about.
Yeah, it's a big game, basically. Everybody plays, you have to sort of play the IP game if you're a tech company, because you don't really get taken seriously unless you do. But the very first patent that we took out was around this concept of using multiple language models to make predictions. And that is actually quite generic, and we're quite pleased that looks like it's now just about to be granted. So it was that kind of core concept that came out of spam filtering.
So it wasn't actually the language model algorithm, it was the way you combine them to deliver.
Yeah, so that sort of is part of the algorithm, but bear in mind that in the UK and Europe you can't patent software. So you patent a method, and it is like a dance basically.
Okay.
It's a sort of weird dance.
Okay, next question. We have one over there.
Hi, you said you mentioned about market growth and how you can get SwiftKey onto much more devices. So with the emergence of ROMs such as CyanogenMod, have you approached them? Because with the emergence of the 1+1 phone, adopting a user-created ROM approach as a base Android operating system, have you approached like say CyanogenMod?
Yeah, we're in discussion with Cyanogen off the record. And it's kind of interesting to see where that would go. I think it's looking pretty tasty at the moment. I think there's a good chance that it'll gain some real traction, and if it does, then we would definitely consider it.
Because I asked that question because I'm a massive fan of the software, I use it, and every time I seem to flash my phone to the latest version of Cyanogen, it always seems to be a product that sticks. SwiftKey, because everything else just seems, as you said, clunky. So what's your predictions on the future? Would you be approaching different companies or different product devs, such as Slimbing, for example?
Yeah, I think we want to try and stay open-minded about it. The balance is, again, about focus. Not trying to split the focus too much, but I think it's a really good point, and it's often you miss these things, and then it's massive, and you kind of haven't spotted it. So yeah, it's a really good point.
Okay, let's do one more, and then we wrap it up. We have one over there.
Hi, how do you structure your hiring process, specifically around some of the AI, iOS and Android guys you bring in? By structure, like how long does the process last? What sort of tests do you put them under?
Yeah.
How do you ensure that you've got a good culture fit?
Yeah, so it's all about kind of getting the pipeline, and it takes a while to get that flowing. So because we work with a lot of agencies, we need to get good candidate CVs sort of flowing through the front end of the funnel, if you like. And then we work through a process where, first off, we get everybody to take an online coding test, if you're an engineer. And we filter based on the results of that. And if the results look decent, then we'll do an introductory phone call. And then if you get through that, then we would bring you in to do an interview. In terms of team fit, that's so difficult to assess. I mean, obviously we would always make sure that we have whoever is going to be this person's peer interviewing them. And the question is, would you really want to work with this person? But you also need, I think, a more senior view on whether you think the person is going to be a good fit. And there's no sort of silver bullet to that. I think the challenge is that if you're too prescriptive in the sort of problem-solving activities that you require people to go through, you end up with a lot of people who are great at problem-solving, but kind of all the same profile.
Okay. It was really an amazing talk, really inspiring. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This was Ben Medlock.